Welcome back, folks, to the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And certainly good talking to you this evening. And what we're going to be discussing today is going to be self-regulatory skills tools, necessary tools of the trade, so to speak, that could be really helpful to you in developing better self regulatory skills whenever under stress. And an important thing to note about self regulatory skills is that whatever skill we're building does occur in the body, but sometimes it's helpful to have an external tool to help us gain some understanding and also give us a better idea as to what it is that actually the result is that's a little more tangible in some cases other than just saying I feel better, which there's nothing wrong with that. But to be very honest, whenever I started developing this program, what I have to think about was the title of this project, and it is a project, and project means work in progress. It doesn't mean that you work on things and that the skills or the benefits come at the end once you're done. That is garnered as we go. We get better as we go, just like any other skill that we do with our body, whether it be basketball, football, martial arts, an area that I love, or even meditation, or even learning how to do something that's fun, like playing a guitar, this sort of thing. Repetition is required. Now, there are certain things about self-regulation that doesn't require quite the repetition that you would require to get very skillful at, say, play the cello. So not so involved, but also a little involved in the sense that there's going to be some repeat. And if you know that we have stress in our lives, we understand that stress in our lives is on repeat, and somehow it seems like stress gains more skill than I have skill against how to counter the effects of it on me. So in this vein, what we're going to be discussing today and delineating how to use and also when to use a little bit are some tools that have helped me along the lines in learning how to develop self-regulatory skill for whenever things are stressful, like when people are trying to strike me and chase me with a stick or things of that nature in martial arts, which it's very useful whenever the stress is on and very immediate, but also whenever the stress is on and you're dealing with something in a more socialized format, such as at work or out in public whenever you're interacting with people at the grocery store, this sort of thing in your everyday life. And even whenever we're dealing with family at home, whenever all bets are off and things can get kind of hairy, and whenever everyone lets their hair down, we can be our most authentic self, things could get pretty authentically stressful there too. So in that spirit, once again, we're going to discuss some tools that are very helpful. And the very first one I'd like to touch upon, it's something that is very useful. A lot of folks use health watches that give you a heart rate and a blood pressure, more or less relative blood pressure, depending on what you're doing, whether you're laying down, sitting down in a recliner, or even walking. And those are incredibly helpful in learning self-regulatory skills because we can tell by the feel of things and with the correlation of whatever reading we may get from our metric of blood pressure, heart rate, this sort of thing, we get an idea. Even in some, you have the O2 sat, whatever your oxygen saturation is, and the higher the saturation, and then that means the lower the relative anxiety. Now, whenever you're in higher activity and you're at a lower rate, you're still in the greater than 90 to 94 degree percent range rather than you're in respiration. So in respiration, physiologically, what's going on is that I breathe and air goes into my lungs, and at the alveoli, there is the gas exchange wherever our oxygen is absorbed, and the little blood vessels carrying blood and all the little erythrocytes, the red blood cells that have hemoglobin, bind to the oxygen molecules and therefore transported throughout the body to where it's needed, all the cells, the muscles, the skin, and organs, and this sort of thing. So mechanically, this is what's going on. And whenever we're in O2 sat, that means that our oxygen saturation is good. That means that we're in an appropriate level of oxygenation for activity, whether it be running, sitting, laying down, sleeping, this sort of thing. And it's autonomic, absolutely automatic, I should say. And what is really amazing about that is that we can improve that oxygen saturation because it is very closely related to levels of reported anxiety. If we have carbon dioxide leaving when we exhale, and an inspiration of oxygen brings it into the system, and yet we have more oxygen leaving with our CO2 than just CO2, then we start going into hyperventilation or what's called hypervent on occasion. But that carbonic gas exchange, oxygen and CO2, carbon dioxide, is dysregulated. We have the beginning of anxiety and that sense of I can't catch my breath. If you've done any intense exercise wherever you're breathing hard and trying to catch your breath, this essentially is what our body is trying to re-regulate back to its normal state or homeostasis, wherever we're oxygenating fine and we're not gasping for breath. Now, this comes back after our heart rate slows down and our demand is much lower. And this is very closely tied to whenever we stress out, to when we get angry, whenever we feel anxiety or panic or post-traumatic stress reactivity or fear. Even when we're having a really good time, our heart rate goes up and we sometimes have to slow down and catch our breath. The activity is very much contingent upon how much oxygen we have. Not enough oxygen, and we go and pass out. We go into syncope, and until our body re-regulates. And then we have enough oxygen, we wake up, and then we're okay unless we fell really hard, that sort of thing. Now, this is really important in the sense that we understand that sometimes stressful events can make us angry, make us irritable. And if we're feeling like we can't catch our breath, we may feel embarrassed, we may feel like people are looking at us, and we become very self-centric. Not self-centered, self-centric in the sense that I'm focusing on myself, how I look, how I feel, and whether or not I'm being judged. And basically, it's just a narrative of what it feels like to feel unsafe in my environment or overwhelmed in my environment and not having the answers as to how to respond appropriately. Now, it's not like there aren't any responses there. We can go into full blown fight flight, and the fight can happen, and the fleeing can happen. So can the freeze, which is potentially very terrifying for some. But to keep this in mind, the tools that we use can help us get a sense of whenever stress levels are going up and what I feel like, that reference point, what I feel like whenever I have a heart rate that's going up. Pretty soon you won't even have to have the watch to get an idea as to, okay, I need to start working on this, or I need to remove myself from a situation, or maybe I need to just avoid the situation altogether. And we can strategize, and strategizing and avoidance is a self-regulatory skill as well, because you know that by not being there, you won't get to that point of discomfort or uncomfortable physical, physiological, and mental emotional dysregulation. And that is a very useful tool as well. But back again, those health watches are amazing. If you don't have that at your disposal, excuse me, there is also the the wrist bound blood pressure cuffs that you can use, and those you can get at most pharmacies. If you don't have one, maybe your mom or your auntie might have one that you can borrow just to get a regular bead on what it feels like whenever you're stressing. Also, this is a good way to test how your blood pressure is whenever you've been doing the breathing regimes that we've been talking about. The two most simple tools, the most effective tools, are the 4 count breath. I've taught this literally to thousands over 15, 16 years. But also, this is something we teach to first responders and soldiers and those going to combat because it's effective right then and there when it works. Even without practice, it's effective. This I can attest to. Now, the other tool is something that Andrew Huberman actually spoke about in his podcast on several occasions when people are using it. But it's something that whenever we're little, we automatically do. It's not something that we're taught that we have. But if we artificially do it, in a sense, intentionally do it, it's equally effective. And I've been testing this with a blood pressure cuff as of late, just to make sure. And sure enough, this actually drops heart rate and blood pressure because relative sense of stress goes away. What we're doing is actually activating the parasympathetic nervous system that cools our jet, so to speak. It actually cools our sympathetic nervous response, settles us down a little more quickly, but it's just very simply, if you listen, it's just 2 quick inhales, 2 nasal sniffs, and then exhale. Whereas with a 4 count breath, It's a little more involved, not a whole lot more. But with this, it's just an immediate sense of relief, and you don't just have to do it once. You can do it several times, and it will actually show a marked difference not only in your heart rate but in your blood pressure. And I would challenge y'all to kind of work on this. I'm not promising any medical cures or anything along those lines. This is all practical. Test yourself, check yourself. These are monitors that help you get an idea on about what's actually going on, what it feels like to stress, and what it feels like whenever stress starts leaving the body, so to speak. So, very important stuff. But once again, the very quick dual nasal inhale with your nose and just blow out. And it's not a pressured thing, but it's very much if you want to see a picture of what it looks like, see the movies wherever the little kids are in comedies and they're crying and they're going, and they're saying and speaking in broken speech and they're having a hard time, and then the that quick double inhale is something that we all kind of do, something my children have done as well, that happens in the natural world, but we actually realize that it's a very uh, useful program that we have within our neurological structure that we can actually incite intentionally and get benefit. The 4 count breath has been around for a while, the square breath as well. And I usually tell people that tell me, well, whenever I get stressed, I deep breathe. The first time I tell them is don't do that. And I usually tell them whoever taught them to deep breathe whenever they're stressed probably don't know what they're doing or what they're talking about. I usually tell them deep breathing is good whenever your assumption of safety is met and you're already calm and you want to relax more and really chill. Deep breathing is wonderful then. Whenever you have a lower sympathetic tone and your parasympathetic tone is a little higher, that sounded almost oxymoronic, where actually you're more relaxed. And that is a good time to use deep breathing. It's not useless, it's just not as useful if you use it at the wrong time, because whenever we do get stressed, we gasp, we suck wind, and we breathe, and we get ready to explosively exhale the amount of gas we just took in and blow out, because now we're ready to mechanically start inhaling and exhaling, not for oxygenation, but for mechanistically providing movement and coordinating the body, consolidating the torso in motion. And yes, it'll oxygenate us as we go. Don't get me wrong, but it's almost secondary whenever we're moving and breathing in that sense, because we should be truly just getting away. So, what do you do whenever it is stressful? The 4 count breath is a good one. What do you do when it's stressful? If it's more immediate and sudden, you can use that double sniff technique. Especially if you see the stress coming or you have to sit there, it's okay. It's very innocuous. No one knows you're doing it unless you tell them. It's pretty ninja that way. That's why I like these tools. But the 4 count breath, if you look on the internet, is also known as the square breath. That's what I used to call it. Then I saw it on the internet and I realized somebody stole the name before I could put it out there. So no credit to me, but that's okay. The credit goes to the fact that it's an effective tool. The first time I saw it used was in the book on combat by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, that did studies on killing and um, mass shootings, this sort of stuff. And very good book for people with PTSD, and kind of gave a description as to how people would write out the stressors that otherwise most people at the time when that book came out didn't have an answer to. And the 4 count breath was one that was very useful. I have found it useful in shooting firearms. It actually calms you a little bit. Also in martial art, whenever I've had to calm between stressors, whenever I'm training with one person, I set out and then train with another, it keeps my technique from actually degrading. So it helps keep you on a more even keel. It doesn't make it all go away, and it doesn't make you sleepy and meditative and calm, but it can get you to the level of lowered stress that you can at that point start working on becoming relaxed and at ease and meditative. So a very useful tool. Now, some of the other external tools, a stopwatch. The stopwatch is fun if you get one of those classic going to the run around the track metal stopwatches. I love those. I think they're phenomenal. I like to see the little second hand, and I have a thing for those things. The digital stopwatches, they're okay, but they're not nearly as fun. But you can see the elapsed time wherever the little red arm starts kind of crossing the face of that little clock. And there's something that I just associate with that from being a little old school, I guess. Digital clocks work just fine, no big deal. I use those too. And often I might even get on the internet and get a stopwatch on the computer and just have it display there. and do my breathing while ever I'm waiting on a download, or if I'm working on something, or I'm trying to chill when it's quiet. But I want to time myself and check my breath or count even my pulse. Very important thing. So that stopwatch is helpful. Now, if you're going to do a pulse on your wrist or your carotid artery, kind of like you do for when you're exercising, or what they actually use for aerobics and stuff like that in the 80s, um, that's an important tool to have. If you have a digital watch, it's easier to do that versus having to have a stopwatch and then put it down or hold it in your hand and trying to do a pulse. But whenever you do measure your pulse, this is another tool. I would encourage you to do it so you get a baseline as to what it's like whenever I'm at my normal pace, at my normal day-to-day job. Even if you're at the desk, you may not be exercising. Take your pulse when you're at your desk, when you're reading emails, when you're reading a book. If you're leaning back watching TV in your favorite recliner, take your pulse. Get it out. You don't have to write it down. You can keep a log if you want to do that, but you don't have to put that kind of pressure on yourself. But get a baseline, get an idea as to where you're at, what it's like, and then determine whether or not, by doing these methods over time, do you have a lowered heart rate? Do you have a lower blood pressure? What is your relative number of breaths per minute? Most people on the average, and I do speak average, not using these tools, between 10 to 12, sometimes 14 not beats, but breaths per minute. I myself, whenever I am stressed, breathe between 6 to 8. Whenever I'm nice and relaxed, most of the time, I'm at about 3.5 to 5 breaths per minute, which isn't bad um, for my age and my size and weight. That's not like athlete's heart rate, anything like that, but it definitely is not bad. And that also means that if it's taken me that long to inspire and expire uh, the, the breath, then I'm not feeling like I am lacking oxygen or feeling stressed or gasping for air. I don't feel like I'm not getting enough air and holding my breath until just to prove my point. Not playing those games. What we're doing is trying to determine how comfortable am I when I'm breathing? How often do I breathe? Get an idea, get a sense for it. Because these ideas are sensitivities you can have to yourself to determine if environment is stressing you somehow, especially if you can't identify it. If we're walking around this social paradigm, the social agreement that everyone is safe, my assumption is safe, and we don't go around trying to hunt or prey on each other, and we're not being ugly to each other, but yet you note tension in someone's voice, or you hear tense conversations going on down the hall. Does it affect your heart rate, even though you're not involved? Just hearing it. Whenever we hear sirens driving by, and the street next to my office, I have no windows, but we definitely hear traffic. Most definitely hear sirens whenever they're running by, as the street is maybe about 25 feet away from the side of the office that my wall is connected to. So that's something to think about. Do those things stress me? When you go to the doctor, I know that I have this response. When I go sit with my doctor, even if I'm not expecting bad news, I still get tense. Whenever I'm going to get blood, I still get a little tense. I don't get scared. I don't freak out. And it doesn't bother me to give blood or needles or anything like this. They don't bother me. I used to be a medic in the military, so I'm very familiar. And also, it doesn't bother me when they have to do these things to me. And it's not about having a high pain tolerance, but at the same time, there's a measure of expectation. And our body subconsciously doesn't want venipuncture. It doesn't want to be poked with a needle. It doesn't want to be told, do this, do that, breathe, stick your tongue out, and how are you doing, and talking about whether or not you have a sex life, and if you do you have STDs, this sort of thing that a typical doctor or nurse will screen. Those are things that we tend to keep rather private. So do those ideas and speaking about such things in that paradigm cause your heart rate to go up? These are important things to know, not only whenever you're at the doctor, but every day. The more aware you are of those things, the better. And whenever you feel the need, and I would encourage you to look, I'm not an affiliate marketer for Heart Math, but if you go to Heart Math and you see some of their tools, they have a computer program with a little module that attaches onto your earlobe and plugs into your computer, and you can sit, and the little bars will go up and down relative to how much relaxation you can induce. And it's not by doing a technique, but just by sheer intention. Just intending to relax is enough to drop heart rate and enough to drop the relative measured tension, blood pressure, this sort of thing. And it's not about knowing your numbers and it has to be down to a certain area, but rather just the intention alone is enough to cause our stress to drop or increase, this sort of stuff. And it's measurable. I used to use one of their little tools called the M Wave. It was a handheld tool that you held under your thumb, and the thumb pulse was measured and the relative stress. And I would teach people that struggled with severe mental illnesses how to be aware that often, whenever their thoughts, their subjective mind, whenever their thinking would take off in flights of fancy, delusional, or real, and worry, that they would cause themselves more stress. But yet, whenever they were holding this little tool and they were paying attention to their body, that they got themselves out of their head, so to speak, and into their body. They were mindful at that moment versus worrying and predicting and expecting what was going to happen in the future, or worrying about what happened in the past, impacting how they were being right now. And that sounds eloquent enough when people talk about it, but the actual embodiment of that process is phenomenal to watch. It's even more amazing to feel it in yourself and realize, wow, I have more control of this vehicle than I thought. And sometimes we do things not realizing I'm impacting the control. And sometimes the control that I'm using is not to my benefit. So we get to rethink and think and feel a little more deeply, and we do actually become mindful in the truest sense, not just because I'm practicing, in quotes, mindfulness meditation, but rather it's a state of being. It's an embodied state of being, something really important to think about. Some tools I'd like to encourage you to consider beyond hard math is realizing that exercise itself is an engendering and a development of resilience in our environment. Part of our environment is relative stress. How hard am I walking? Am I running? Sometimes swimming. If you enjoy swimming, it doesn't have to be hard. It can just be enjoyable, or at least movement. Whenever you swim, if you like to swim a little bit underwater, you don't have to go deep, but just subsurface and you swim. Where whenever you push yourself a little bit, you can get up and get air quickly. That's perfect. That puts you under a controlled sense of duress. You don't have to hold yourself down to do that, to prove anything. The idea is to allow yourself to move when you're in oxygen saturation, allowing yourself basically to enjoy the benefits of the oxygen floating in your blood while you're moving, but not mechanically inhaling and exhaling. You're using your residual O2 saturation, your oxygen saturation. So that is a good way to develop some relative resilience and also some not only mental toughness, but also flexibility, knowing that I can do this. And when you realize that, things not only feel better, but we do better. And there's a great sense of relaxation whenever we get that sweet breath after we get out. And that is an amazing way to validate I'm still here in a very safe way, but also give you a skill that makes you feel like you're more here. That embodied sense of being mindful, your here-ness is enhanced. So definitely amazing. Walking is a good way to do this too. And what I want to tell you once again is that skill building is really a big, important part of skill development along the lines of self-regulation, because we're teaching our body how, we're conditioning our body how to overcome. And it's not a difficult thing, it's just a matter of walking regularly. So, in that vein, I want to tell you thanks for listening. And I just want to share some things that give us an idea as to what we can use to develop self regulatory skills with that make the journey not only a little more fun, a little more easy, a little more sciencey, and it's fun to share with your family and your kiddos and teach them to do that so they become more self-aware as they will. Y'all take care. It's certainly good talking to you. Share this podcast with people you think would benefit. I am on the internet all over the place. And the project is on iTunes, and they have transcripts there. If you have any friends that are hearing impaired that you think might benefit, send them there. They're amazingly well done transcripts. And I also have a following on X, very small, YouTube, and also on Spotify. So, y'all folks take care. Really good talking to you. Walk well.